Hello and welcome back to the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021. It is our second and unfortunately our final day, but we do have two wonderful panels for you today and a lineup of impressive speakers from all over the globe. Today will be all about diplomacy with two panels on cultural diplomacy and economic diplomacy. The first led by founder Isabelle Vladoiu and the second led by President Manuel Oancia, hosting multiple distinguished guests. So thank you all for joining us today on the last day of the summit. Please engage in the conversation using the hashtag USIDHR Summit 2021 and let us know right now where you're watching us from. Moving forwards, I want to introduce you to our host for today, who has been working so hard for many years through her work to spread positivity, respect, and love. To introduce you to her work, I invite you to watch this short video.
My name is Isabelle Vladoiu, and I'm deeply honored to participate in this summit.
So please, on the final day of the 2021 summit, please welcome international specialist on human rights law, best-selling author, and of course, founder of US Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, Miss Isabelle Vladoiu, your host for the final day of the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021.
Thank you so much, dear Ms. Flavel. I'm so excited to be here. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, participants joining us from all over the world. It's my honor to have you here today. And on behalf of the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, I'd like to welcome you all to the second day of the 2021 Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit. It's a privilege to host our second annual summit and bring this event to your homes, live streaming from the USIDHR headquarters in Washington, D.C. Myself and, as you saw, the entire team are still reeling from the successes of the first day of the summit. We want to truly give thanks to all of yesterday's attendees and guest speakers who have made this event so spectacular. As you know, last year when we ran our first summit, the world looked pretty different, and putting on an online summit was an ambitious task. But we did it successfully, and being able to say that we continued with that legacy onto this year is something that we are so grateful for. Thank you. Speaking of legacies, we are going to continue our journey into revealing why both the respect for human rights and the use of diplomatic means are important by moving to our diplomacy panels today. As an international specialist in human rights law and a practitioner of NGO diplomacy for over a decade, I've seen these two concepts often intertwined. And there is also the concept of diplomacy of human rights as a whole, which looks at ways on how countries, especially emerging powers, can promote human rights in their foreign policies as a key part of bilateral agreements or relationships. At the same time, it means diplomacy aimed at strengthening international rules in the field of human rights by recognizing new types of rights, for example, a right to peace. While one of the aim of aims of USIDHR is to help facilitate citizen diplomacy more successfully by connecting advocates with those in power and show that every person can adopt diplomatic methods to make social change. We encourage our human rights advocates to find solutions through diplomacy, not by pointing fingers or blaming governments or individuals for problems, but to promote sustainable peacemaking methods. This is why we champion the value of education so much. Our entire motto at USIDHR is advancing education for all, as educating people and society is the only way to find innovative solutions. But we also need to acknowledge and help those who are not in position to help themselves. This is why we came up with our humanitarian program, Edu for Every Child, to help impoverished children escape cycles of poverty. By giving them an Edu box, the educational box, we provide them all the resources they need to attend school for an entire year and put them on the path to accessing their potential as future change makers. There are currently, unfortunately, 258 million out-of-school children worldwide. So this change won't happen overnight, but events such as this summit help spread our mission and the need for it. For those joining for the first time, yesterday and today are more than just a summit. They are more than just an event. It's about looking back at what we did to make the world a better place this year. Almost like a mini New Year's Eve, if you want to call it like that, where we get to look back on what actions we took and share them with you all. So for this, I would like my team to ask you to watch together a short video that my team prepared just for you. And now allow me to start the second day of the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021 with the first panel of discussions on the subject of cultural diplomacy. To introduce you to the topic, cultural diplomacy has been defined as the exchange of ideas, information, art, and other aspects of culture among nations and their peoples in order to foster mutual understanding. Cultural activities are perhaps one of the most important components of public diplomacy because they can represent the idea of how nations and citizens of such nations see themselves. And since these cultures are passed on through generations, any changes will be seen by everyone around them. This includes those abroad, the diasporas, who continue to uphold the traditions and values of their motherland, even when living in a different area far away from home. While the world is still in an era of uneasy peace, cultural diplomacy has been used effectively by governments to promote bonding with other countries and their cultures. Cultural diplomacy is crucial in nowadays society, or as the US Department of State says, cultural diplomacy is actually the linchpin of public diplomacy. But cultural diplomacy is not and should not be promoted only at the state level. And as we've seen throughout history, cultural diplomacy is not the exclusive mastery of diplomatic missions, but also that of non-state actors. It is said that a country is only as strong as prosperous as its citizens. That's why non-state actors should contribute to programs that promote cultural understanding. Oftentimes, NGOs on the ground or with offices in certain areas exercise a greater influence on state actors, allowing them to gain better insight and acting as a liaison between the diplomatic community, government, and the private sector. Since 2016, I had the honor to be also the editor-in-chief of the Global Ambassador Journal, which is a magazine devoted solely to the publication of articles and study by worldwide diplomats, focusing on diplomacy and international relations. In this capacity, I've worked tirelessly to give a voice to more than 70 diplomats around the world speaking on behalf of their countries. And what makes Global Ambassador Journal so special is that this is not just a commercial magazine. It is a specialized journal indexed by the Library of Congress. That's why it has been often called the voice of international diplomacy. But speaking of non-state actors and their role in promoting cultural diplomacy, it is in this aim that the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights was founded, not only to help educate and bring to the forefront the important role of diplomacy and diplomats in a democratic society, but also to help diplomats in their missions, building bridges between them, the community, the government, and the private sector. Just this past year in 2021, I personally trained more than 500 people, diplomats, leaders of nonprofits, doctors, lawyers, advocates, who have graduated one of our most popular courses at USIDHR, the Diplomatic Protocol and Etiquette course, which introduces anyone to many fundamentals, from how to use the proper forms of address for ambassadors, diplomats, royals, and any government, how to navigate through the different cultural norms of each country, how to seat and arrange guests by their order of precedence, and many other wonderful things. My book, Business Etiquette Secrets, has reached millions so far, becoming an Amazon bestseller and allowing anyone from anywhere understand and use diplomatic tools in their businesses or home affairs. Non-state actors, therefore, have become resourceful stakeholders of public diplomacy. Some even argue that even study abroad students should be at the center of cultural diplomacy as they develop and sustain relationships with people from host countries through cultural immersions and education. But we will get to hear more. And without further ado, I would now like to introduce you to our special guests and panelists from today's first panel of discussion on cultural diplomacy. Thank you. So today's first session features many distinguished guests, including His Excellency Radovan Javorcik, the Ambassador of the Slovak Republic to the United States, and diplomats from various embassies, the Embassy of Portugal, the Embassy of Georgia, Greece, and I'm so honored you could all be here with us on this special day. Let me personally welcome each one of you as we proceed through our agenda. So, Your Excellency, His Excellency Radovan Javorcik, the Ambassador of the Slovak Republic to the United States, thank you for being with us here. Then we have Ms. Sandra Pires, she is the Cultural Attaché from the Embassy of Portugal to the United States. Welcome. We have Mr. Spyridon Heracles Aktypis, the Counselor at the Embassy of Greece. Welcome. And we have Mr. Ahmad Tur, the Prime Minister's National Youth Council from Pakistan. Welcome you all. We unfortunately got a last-minute message from His Excellency Ambassador Nureddin Sati, who's the Ambassador of Sudan to the United States. An emergency came up, and unfortunately he couldn't be with us today, but we have all our distinguished panelists. So to give you the roundabouts how this session is going to work, I'm going to introduce each one of you. I'm going to offer you a 5-7 minutes opportunity opportunity to address the audience. We have people joining us from all over the world. And then after each one of you speaks for about 5 to 7 minutes, we will have a panel discussion and we'll take some questions from the public. So without further ado, let me begin and introduce again to you His Excellency Ambassador Radovan Javorcik. He has assumed his duties as the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Slovak Republic to the United States in January 2021. So, Ambassador, welcome to Washington, D.C. We are so grateful having you here. He's a career diplomat and has served in the Slovak Foreign Service since 1995 in various roles. After posting at the Slovak Permanent Mission to NATO in 1998 to 2002, he continued his work on NATO files as a team leader and later as Deputy Director for Security Policy. He was part of a team preparing Slovakia's accession to NATO, mainly in capacity of the head of pre-name preparation for NATO membership. So without further ado, Your Excellency Ambassador Javorcik, we are so grateful having you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I hope the technology works well. This was a very nice introduction because normally people would assume that somebody who worked 8 years in and around NATO is far flung away from culture and cultural diplomacy. But it's just the opposite because we all know that the traditional diplomacy is about negotiations behind closed doors in secluded environment. Sometimes in a nice environment, sometimes not in so nice environment, but it's about intimate negotiations between the people. But also in NATO, what we discovered, and not the only discovered, we assumed as a normal, was not just to enlighten us with arts and culture, but we were presenting our countries in various forms. And everything starts at home. If people are not somehow connected to their culture and don't know their history, it's very hard to create emotions about a country. You can have a wonderful ambassadors and wonderful diplomats, wonderful scientists, perhaps, but if you cannot create emotions to attach to your country, then it's very difficult to make a footprint on your country and share your values with the others. So even in a highly technical and political organization like in NATO, we were very much aware of value of culture, and one part of the culture is what we call a culinary diplomacy. It's not only about the arts, but it's also art of cooking and presenting your culture and diversity of your nation to the rest of your colleagues and to the wider public. And sometimes it's even easier to present your country and present your values and underpin your positions when you have a specific cultural event through which you show where you are, from where you come, and why perhaps some of your political positions are strong on certain things. So it's very important to us. For a smaller nation like mine, we are only 5.5 million people. It's Slovakia is as big as state of Indiana, for example, in terms of population. It's very important to find the identity, and we have definitely our European identity. And my Portuguese and Greek colleague will join me, I hope, when I will say and agree with me that we have also our European identity. And it's not uniform European identity, because there are many smaller identities. But to show that you belong to a certain community of values and some progress, that's very important. One thing which is sometimes forgotten when people are seeing us, the diplomats, joining a concert or performances, exhibitions, how important for us is to show up there. And it's not only that we want to see something which is interesting, but it's paying a respect to the country which holds the exhibition, which creates a nice ballet or opera, and you just pay tribute to that country. And it's very, very important because that's where you build your relationships. And diplomacy without relationships is definitely not working. In this first introduction, I just really want to stress, even from a technical diplomatic point of view, how important it is to create emotions, not just to show your wisdom and clarity of mathematical formulas, but how important it is to create emotions so the other person or other nation can understand you. Just to give you one example, which I think is perfect to show how important cultural diplomacy is. When we sing our national songs, for example, I mean the folk songs, in Europe we have 20 plus languages. And if I sing in a Slovak our folk songs, I'm not sure that the Greek or Portuguese people or the British would understand it. But the feeling you create, then it just drags you in and enables you to have more interaction and better understanding what you want to achieve in the future. So it's definitely not about the wealth of your bank account, but it's wealth of your cultural heritage and way how to promote things. And one important thing, and that's the last one before I end. The cultural diplomacy cannot be just intertwined as something like PR, or in Israel people would say hasbara, or through a branding. This is not about marketing something, because you can market a product, you can market a cell phone or a computer, but to sell your nation, it's not selling a product. You are presenting your culture, you are presenting your values, and that's much more important. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that intervention. And it's true, you made a very valid point towards the end of your remarks, which I want our audience, if you missed and if you are joining us right now, there is a difference between cultural diplomacy and national branding. And sometimes, although in practice these can feel like somehow intertwined or confused with one another, we have to make sure we don't go into, like the marketing part of aspect, because cultural diplomacy, and as I open up my introduction, is much more than that. It's about community, relationships, and all coming up together. Your Excellency, I know your schedule is very, very busy for today, and I really appreciate you being with us here today. I know won't be able to be until like the end where we have the Q&A session. So one question just came up from the audience, which I think it tackles into what you just discussed, and it's how we can use cultural diplomacy to build or rebuild a stronger international community post-pandemic right now.
Well, it's a brilliant question, because usually you can respond that it's the rebuilding after the pandemic. It's about meeting people for business, for travel, just return back to normal. But my own experience from Washington, D.C. was when we, with my wife, who is herself a cultural diplomat, she works at the Department of Cultural Diplomacy, so I have very intimate connection to this agenda. When we went to see the opening of the National Symphonic Orchestra season, and when we have seen the symphonic orchestra to stand up and play the American anthem, standing and everybody just singing, you had a goosebumps around you, and that even for us non-Americans, this was just a moment. I said to the hosts around me, this is the moment everybody wants to live, because
exactly. We need to go back to that, and I can't wait to be able to host again in-person events at your beautiful embassy in Washington, D.C. and obviously, at our headquarters, and so thank you so much for answering that, Your Excellency. You're welcome to stay with us as long as your time allows, and hear into the next panelist. So right now, I will move on to our next panelist of the day, which is Ms. Sandra Pires. She serves as a cultural attaché for the Embassy of Portugal to the United States. She was originally born in Mozambique. She graduated in modern languages and literatures from the University of Bari, Italy. She did her PhD course in comparative African literatures at the Nova University in Portugal, and a postgraduate certificate in Portuguese contemporary culture in Lisbon. She has taught Portuguese language and cultures to Portuguese-speaking countries at several universities in Europe, Africa, and the United States. It is my pleasure and honor to have you here, Ms. Pires. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the president of the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, Mr. Manuel Oancia, and our moderator and founder of the USIDHR, Isabelle Vladoiu. I hope I said your name right. And I agree to distinguished participants of this panel. So culture is an important branch of diplomacy in the sense that it's through and with culture that you can show some parts of what best exists in your country. You can make people understand your country better. Ultimately, it is a representation of your country. So during the hardcore COVID days, the cultural diplomacy faced a very difficult moment. We had to reinvent ourselves in all ways possible, but thankfully it is flourishing again. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have done this year in terms of cultural diplomacy at the Embassy of Portugal in Washington, D.C. So as you might know, we recently had the presidency of the Council of the EU in the first half of 2021. Here in D.C., we decided to do all the events online because of the pandemic. So we had the launch of the presidency with a video of all the ambassadors of the EU saying a few words, a message from the ambassador of Portugal to the US, Domingos Fezes Vital, and the jazz concert. Each month we had a webinar on Zoom and a Facebook Live contemporarily. We started out by doing these seminars at the Embassy of Portugal, having important invitees from both sides of the Atlantic, and we ended up doing them with think tanks like the Brookings American Enterprise Institute, etc. The seminars were about the priorities of our presidency. So we had webinars on climate change, the digital transition, and then we also had some webinars with interesting topics such as the contribution of the European diasporas to the EU-US relations, global challenges, a transatlantic response to the present geostrategic context, the Biden's administration drug policy strategy, and lessons from Portugal. Every month, after each seminar, we had a concert. In 6 months, we organized 6 seminars and 6 concerts from different music genders. Still during our presidency, we also showed the Portuguese Contemporary Architecture exhibition for almost 2 months at Dupont Underground. I don't know if you know this multidisciplinary and versatile space here in DC. This exhibition was one of the most successful at that space. It was very daring because we were planning to do this exhibition during the hardcore COVID times. We finally put the exhibition up in the beginning of April, and it lasted until the end of May. The good thing was that we had 500 visitors only in the first weekend. People were really keen on going to events again after a year they were not allowed to. We also had, and still have, the presidency of UNIC DC, the DC cluster of the European Union National Institutes for Culture. With this group of 17 countries' representations, we organized an interdisciplinary series of exhibitions that we gave the name A Window to Europe Through Literature and Art, at the window gallery in Parkview called Plain Sight DC. So 11 countries participated in this project, and each country was paired with a local visual artist, and each artist read the book from the country they were paired with from the Reader Project. The exhibition started on September 27th, and every 3 weeks it changes. In each exhibition, 2 countries are represented at a time. This series of short exhibitions will last until the end of January. It is a joint project between UNIC DC, Plain Sight DC, the EU delegation in the US, and the Reader Project. So what Ambassador Radovan was saying about the European identity, of course, Portugal also has a very strong European identity. So now we are on the third series of exhibitions, and you are invited to see the exhibition at Plain Sight if you would like. It's on Georgia Avenue 3218 in DC. So also with the EU delegation in the US and other EU countries, we organized the Europe Day on May 9th. We used to do the EU open house, where we would open our embassies to the public, and we used to have around 3,000 people visiting the embassy of Portugal. With COVID times, that has been impossible, so we have been doing different events. This year, we organized the virtual scavenger hunt, a podcast about sports and traditions from our countries, and the song from each country in a format like Eurovision. With the EU, we also organized the Kids Euro Festival in October. We brought 2 workshops for kids, one in person with a Portuguese American artist about culture. It was a culture and art workshop where she taught some Portuguese traditions to the kids and how to make crafts. And the other workshop was a culture and music workshop online for public schools kids. So a famous fado singer taught the students about fado and sang also some songs. So we also have an identity with the Ibero-American countries as well. So with the Ibero-American countries, we organize typically 3 events each year. So we have the Gala, the Film Festival, and the Art Exhibition. With the COVID situation, we have been doing virtual events only. This year, we organized the Virtual Film Festival and the Virtual Guitar Festival that is still on. You can watch it going to the link at Ibero-American Culture DC Facebook page. With the Portuguese-speaking countries with representation in DC, we normally organize each year the Portuguese Language Day on May 5th, a display of crafts, gastronomy, music, films, literature. Every year we change it. We also organize our own events, of course, and this year we organized 2 days, 2 days creative writing workshop with a famous Portuguese writer. His name is José Luís Peixoto. So we also organized the Day of Portugal, Camões and the Portuguese communities. We have also done a virtual book launch of Fernando Pessoa's A Biography by Richard Zenith, with Richard Zenith, of course, and many more events. Just yesterday, we had a classical music concert by the pianist Nuno Marques with the International Club of DC, followed by a dinner at the residence of the ambassador, and it was in person. So yes, I would like also to ask the audience if they would like to know more of what we do at the Embassy of Portugal in Washington, D.C. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and you can find almost everything we organize there. So you can find it by Embassy of Portugal, Washington, D.C., or Portugal in the U.S. So I'm sorry if I spoke too much and if I took more time than expected. I hope I gave you an overview of what we do and what we have done. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pires. You did not take at all so much.
Okay.
I enjoyed hearing you, talking you about everything that I was unaware of, like the amazing work that you personally led at the Embassy of Portugal, even during this challenging pandemic times. I also encourage everyone to visit or go to these events. Obviously, I can't wait to participate or attend a new, let's say, a fado concert here in Washington, D.C., which is one of my most favorite types of music in the world. I want to take a moment and tell you that we have people joining us from all over the world, and they are saying hello to you, Ms. Pires, to the guests, and also to His Excellency as well, from Liberia, from Kenya, so from Alberta, Haiti, Kurdistan, Georgia, all different countries here. So thank you all for joining us and watching. We are live on our Facebook page and on our YouTube page. Yesterday's we had more than 53,000 page reaches. It was an incredible day. So I hope today it's going to live up to that expectation, being our final day, our second day. And right now we are going to continue. Thank you so much, Ms. Pires. We'll get some question from the audience because I already saw a few towards the end. So let's continue right now with our next panelist, which is Dr. Spyridon Aktypis, who is the third counselor at the Embassy of Greece. Dr. Aktypis, He is a diplomat at the Embassy of Greece in Washington, D.C. Before joining the Foreign Service at the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he served as director of Amnesty International Greece and taught international law and human rights at various universities in Europe. He is the author of a series of papers on the European Court of Human Rights and the International Criminal Law, and holds a PhD from the University of Paris Canton Assas. Welcome you, Dr. Aktypis, and you have the floor now.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. The embassy is very pleased to be here with you today and with all people across the globe who are attending your wonderful event. I would like to go back to your introduction, and you rightly talked about the traditional diplomacy and where cultural diplomacy is situated in relation to the traditional diplomacy. So if by diplomacy we mean traditionally the promotion of peace, security, and prosperity through cooperation and dialogue, cultural diplomacy tries to reach the same goals, but through cultural cooperation and exchange. Isabelle, you talked about it in the beginning of this session. However, and this is my first point, if the actors of the international political arena and therefore of diplomacy are mainly the states and international organizations, by definition, cultural diplomacy is not the exclusive privilege of state actors, but also, if not predominantly, of non-state actors. You mentioned this point as well. These non-state actors, range from, emblematic cultural institutions or less emblematic and art industries like cinema, to everyday citizens, regular citizens like all of us. Whether we produce art, we're artists in some way, or we consume art. So by essence, citizens practice already cultural diplomacy and are a vital key element to diplomacy in general. So citizens do not have a direct place and role in traditional diplomacy, what we call, international politics, but citizens participate indirectly even in traditional diplomacy through, of course, elections. So as constituents, they approve the foreign policy program of the government, and at some point in the next electoral cycle, they are called to assess the outcomes. Of course, here we have a problem with the countries where free and fair elections do not take place. But to go back to the cultural diplomacy's main target group is not the state actors, but rather the regular citizens, everyday life citizens. Through various forms of art and artistic and cultural expression, including languages and the natural environment, cultural diplomacy aims at building bridges among nations, peoples, groups, citizens, and ultimately bring closer citizens, regular citizens, from different countries, traditions, and regions. And this is not an easy task in normal times, not to speak of the pandemic era. The pandemic has cast light and has further deepened, unfortunately, the gaps and inequalities that existed before in this regard between developed and developing countries, but also within countries, between those who have the means and those who do not have the means to have access to culture. So the question, because we all go through this very difficult period of the pandemic, which is not over, unfortunately, so the question here is what we can do and whether the pandemic offers some new opportunities to build a stronger international community. And this was a very pertinent question also that Ambassador had to answer before. And I would like to echo what he said, because the past the past 1 year and a half, which was really very difficult period for all of us, taught us a lot and is still teaching us a lot of lessons. Since the economic and social repercussions of the pandemic are still felt across the globe. And one of the lessons is that art and creativity in all their possible forms can be a refuge when the world seems really to fall apart. Think about all the films series we all watched during the strict lockdown, the first months of the pandemic. A second lesson that through this new experience of consuming massively art from home, people reinvented new communalities. And there was a point again during the first months of the pandemic where all witnessed that, the world is really a small village. And this was made possible through art, through watching films or whatever at the same time from our home. And technology was the medium through which people remained connected. Despite travel bans and lockdowns, technology gave us the access to museums, concerts, new teaching creative tools. And internet became the new and at some point the only modern agora, the only modern marketplace of ideas and cultural exchange. But, and this is a big but, at the same time, not all people were able to be part of these new communalities. A significant part of the world was simply excluded from this togetherness because of poverty. This created new barriers, exacerbated discriminations, and fed strong feelings of frustration, exclusion, and at some point, even anger. Culture is an effective mean to cure these new divisions, but in order to be able to do so, we need a new paradigm through education and mass media, including social media. And you, the USIDHR, work and excel in this field. Value and promote genuinely cultural diversity, geographically, historically, should be the starting point, the universal minimum common denominator. And if I may, we need the equivalent of a Universal Declaration of Human Rights here, the Universal Declaration of Culture. So, culture can play a key role to building a stronger international community in a post-pandemic era, but the implementation proves to be a Herculean task, which brings us back to international politics. We need the political will of world leaders to make all people feel, through culture, part of the same family. Otherwise, we will continue to build walls, new walls, that separate nations and peoples, that separate citizens. And this time, these new walls will be invisible and therefore even more difficult to tear them down. Thank you for your time.
Dr. Aktypis, thank you for your time. I think you share so many nuggets of knowledge, and you can see the professor of international law and human rights in you. I welcome the initiative of, and I'm going to be on board with that if we ever come together as nations to draft or adopt a universal declaration on culture that it's able to bring nations together. I think that's an excellent idea. So thank you so much, Dr. Aktypis, for expressing that. I'm still watching the comment section here. Everyone still joining us from London, from the United States, from Greece. I see comments in Greece, in Portuguese. I'm so excited, and I hope after this session you will be able also to go back and interact a bit with our audience, who are definitely very interested in hearing what you have to say in participating the cultural events you are putting together. And also I would like to offer you at USIDHR, obviously we do have a huge platform, international platform, so anytime you have cultural events that you want to spread out to the audience, you're always welcome to send it to us, and we will help you distribute it throughout network, because here we are to build that bridge as non-state actors in making sure those relationships come together even during challenging times as the pandemic. And we are so fortunate in having created this virtual summit. I have to be honest with you, we never thought that we are going to do it. The plans last year when we had our first Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit was to do it in person in the US Congress. Everything was set up, and then the pandemic came, and we had to transition everything. Not only that, but all our in-person trainings and courses on diplomatic protocol and etiquette, on human rights, human trafficking, and so forth. We had to build an entire platform, student platform, where everybody was able and is able to graduate from the comfort of their own homes, log in and learn all these new tools and get certified either as a human rights consultant, as a diplomatic protocol consultant, and so forth. So I appreciate the intervention, Dr. Aktypis. Now we move forward with our next guest, Mr. Ahmad Tour. He is coming from the Prime Minister's National Youth Council of Pakistan. Mr. Tour serves on the Prime Minister's National Youth Council in Pakistan. He's also the National Youth Delegate and Youth Representative at the Commonwealth Youth Council at the United Nations International Youth Federation. He's graduated from Pakistan, and currently he's pursuing his master's in public policy and governance. He has been working for more than 6 years and is the highest Pakistani young leader to speak at the United Nations. On his humanitarian services, the royal family of the United Kingdom has also honored him with the Diana Award in 2020. He has traveled to more than 15 countries to host and organize international conferences and summits. He's a true cultural ambassador of his country. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you Mr. Ahmad Tour, who's recently also has joined the team at USIDHR remotely because he's continuing to travel the world as a diplomatic liaison officer and member of the honorary board. So thank you so much, Mr. Tour. Welcome you, and you have the floor.
Respected founder, USIDHR, Ms. Isabelle Vladoiu, and His Excellencies, thank you so much for inviting me to share a platform with ambassadors and diplomats and other dignitaries as well. Well, I'm none other than Ahmad Tour, and thank you so much for a very good and brief introduction. And it's my profound privilege to be here to exhibit and share my, I would say, few cents on the topic, which is cultural diplomacy. And I knew that the people which I'm sharing screen with has tons of more experience than me. I'm just like a new kid in this, but I would really like to share my views and my thoughts and the cultural learning which I have been getting from different countries. I started working in social sector in 2016, and I've been since ever since then I've been traveling around the world, meeting and making new connections in different part of the country, learning their culture, their religious values, and you know what, coming up from different background. It really blows my mind to learn about the people and their perspective as well. And whenever we start hosting events and international conferences in different countries, since 2019, we started with South Africa, and we wanted to, know people in different way. Yes, we can, hear your stories. We can talk about your work. We can see your social work which you are doing in your country. But I wanted to know their personal lives and how their country looks like. So we introduce a segment in our international conference. We call it a cultural day. So on that particular day, what we do is we tell every candidates, every participants of the conference is okay. Come, bring your flags, have your cultural dresses, and let's talk about your country. Let's talk about the food. Let's talk about your religious integrations. So that's how we can learn like more about 70 to 80 countries at a very same day. So it was a very unique experience for me, and likewise we used to travel, travel back and forth. We used to know more about the countries. Now, if I like see a person and I can really tell where he is or she is from, and this is just because of my experience. Because we were the cultural ambassadors and the diplomats of definitely non-official, but again we were representing our countries, our cultural and religious values in different part of the world, and likewise the diplomats have also been doing the same. So it was a really extinguished experience for me. in the country, but the country really don't want it to, and because more learnings, because you know what they say, the more you interact, the more you learn, the more you learn, the more the knowledge you have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tor. Unfortunately, the connection was a bit unstable at times, but I think we got some nuggets of knowledge and sharing you as from a young perspective, from a young leader who has traveled the world and meeting with so many high-level officials and then starting to be a part of them. We are so grateful having you here live streaming directly from Pakistan. And as we are moving forward with the panel now, that we heard from our distinguished guest and panelists today. As I mentioned, unfortunately, His Excellency Ambassador Javorchik had to leave earlier, but we are still here with our distinguished panelists, and we would like to take, I see the comment section getting more and more active, and I would like to transition a bit into the asking question. I'll ask the question and I'll ask each one of you to answer the same question from your own perspective, obviously. But before I go into that, I want to mention that a lot of the comments kind of like go over the same thing and over and over. So I want to like break it out there for all of you and our audience as well. Again, emphasizing how important it is cultural diplomacy as a soft diplomacy, as a way of public diplomacy, not only from state level actors in diplomatic missions, but also for us as citizens, as participants. And Mr. Tour also, it's a living example of that. I see right now on the screen, and I would like to welcome and introduce also another distinguished panelist. So we will go after that on the Q&A section. We heard so far from Ms. Sandra Pires from the Embassy of Portugal, and Dr. Aktypis from the Embassy of Greece, and Mr. Ahmad Tour from the Prime Minister Youth Council. I see joining with us right now is Mr. Josep Giorgioliani, who's the first secretary at the Embassy of Georgia to the United States, sorry, the second secretary at the embassy. Mr. Giorgioliani, welcome. I'm going to introduce you and allow you 5 to 7 minutes to speak on behalf of the embassy and about your work on cultural diplomacy, and then we will get all together with the distinguished panelists in the Q&A section. So Mr. Giorgioliani, he serves as the second secretary at the Embassy of Georgia to the United States, dealing with the relationships with USAID and other U.S. governmental agencies. Previously, he has served as the public affairs officer at external relations and communications, media relations, in representational and cultural activities management. Without further ado, I'd like you to introduce you and give the floor to you right now, Mr. Giorgioliani. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm sorry I joined late. I had some technical difficulties. I'm gonna keep it very brief. It's a pleasure for me to be here with distinguished fellow diplomats. Before I talk about here post-COVID challenges of our cultural section, I want to highlight some key facts of U.S.-Georgia cultural ties. From day one of Georgia's regained independence, U.S. has been very active in supporting Georgia and with its foreign aid. And part of it was a number of cultural exchanges, be it the Flex program, Fulbright, or Maskey program, and those programs actually gave rise to new generation of leaders for Georgia. And that led to the Georgia's formation as a Western-oriented state, as a European and Euro-Atlantic aspirant state. As you may know, Georgia's key priority is to become member of NATO and the EU and expand bilateral ties with the US. So in that sense, having a cultural diplomacy with the US is a very, very priority in our work. So this posting here in DC is playing a huge role in there. I've been personally involved with the embassy for 4 years, and we led a number of initiatives which included cultural activities related to Independence Day events, and then annual Georgia-U.S. Strategic Partnership Conference that is dedicated to a comprehensive view of Georgia-U.S. relations. So it's happening every year. We also did pre-pandemic, of course, Georgian film screenings at the embassy. That brought together a number of different university students and exposed them to Georgian cinematography. Now, with the after, like during COVID, we had to adjust. So we switched to having the film screenings on Facebook and on Zoom and having those conferences online. And also we did a number of events at the embassy where we invited university students and the ambassador gave public lectures for them. We engaged Georgetown, GW, Johns Hopkins University, and that was very good to expose the students to Georgia. Of course, with the current situation, many universities have restrictions, and in practical terms, we are trying to do it online in a Zoom or Google Meet or other platforms. And those are like local initiatives that we are having here in DC. But in a wider perspective, Georgian government has a number of cultural diplomacy milestones. For example, most recently, Georgian Prime Minister announced that Georgian government is sponsoring a Georgian studies program at the Harvard University, which is a great tool for Americans to get exposed to Georgian culture and learn more about the history and of all things Georgia, basically. And as we talk about, Georgian cultural diplomacy and Georgia soft power, of course, we have to mention, wine and Georgian cuisine. As we are the homeland of wine, now we have the scientific study supporting that evidence that Georgia was the birthplace of wine from 8,000 years ago. And that is a very great promotional tool for us to focus around, and I'm happy to see that despite the pandemic, Georgian wine exports to the US and to other markets have been exponentially increasing. And our efforts in DC and promotion of Georgian wine and Georgian cuisine and Georgian culture has in some way led to a number of restaurants opening in DC area. And I believe that our work has like a little role in saying that across the US, there was always belief that, somebody asks you where you're from, you say from Georgia, the people would associate it with the state of Georgia. But right now it's becoming more and more the belief that Georgia is a beautiful country in South Caucasus with great landmarks and there's a birthplace of wine. And so in a nutshell, I mean, cultural diplomacy throughout the 30 years of Georgia's regained independence with the US was very important. That has contributed to a number of different sectors developed in Georgia. And here I'm proud to be a part of embassy team that has deepened those cultural ties with the US. Well, that was a short 5 minutes. I'll let you now with the Q&A session. And sorry again for the late intro.
Thank you so much, Mr. Giorgioliani. Nothing to apologize for. We understand, and the audience understands that right now technology, it's a new tool that we all have to kind of like guide ourselves through it to make sure we are on that. And we did have some last minute changes, so that's completely understandable. You brought up some amazing point, which brought to myself some amazing memories about the Georgian wine you were talking about while I was hosting and interacting with the former ambassador, His Excellency Ilia Georgatse, who was the ambassador of Romania, of Georgia to Romania at that time. He's currently the ambassador of Georgia into the Kingdom of Spain. So we had some great interaction and discussion over a Georgian glass of wine. So definitely thank you for bringing that up. And I also want to point out, because I like the fact that you mentioned different universities, because right now in our audience, we send an invitation to all the universities, not only in the United States, in Georgia as well, and other countries who are watching us from all around the world. So we have like the Durham University, Manchester University, we have from Georgetown, from George Washington University, from American University, and the American Military University as well. So we are grateful for you having mentioned that as well, because they are an important part of our audience. Obviously, students are the future leaders of tomorrow, who right now they are adding more into their skills and their knowledge to be able to do what I'm doing, what you are doing, and then hopefully for those international students go back to their countries and continue to promote engaging in cultural diplomacy methods and means. So thank you for joining us also in the panel. Unfortunately, I see that Mr. Tour is also having some technical difficulties. As you know, Pakistan has been going the internet nowadays. It's kind of like tricky. So hopefully he will be able to join us back again. But we are so grateful for his interaction here, for spreading some knowledge for the younger generation as well, to make sure that we are in all this together, creating those relationships that Dr. Aktypis was talking about, and also Ms. Pires. Okay, so let's go. Let's progress. We are progressing very fast through this panel discussion, which is amazing. It's fantastic. I'm so glad that I am the moderator of this panel. Obviously, for me, cultural diplomacy, it's something very, very dear to my heart. As an immigrant myself, I had to be able to promote, my country. But now working in for an international NGO, and in the past as well, I have to promote all the nations, okay, all the different cultures. So it's my pleasure to feature you all here and talk about your countries. So some of the question, and we ask His Excellency, but I want to go back a bit to that, because I think it's so important nowadays. One of the question that was asked the most in the comment section, somehow in this form or not, is, can we use cultural diplomacy to rebuild a stronger international community right now, after the pandemic, post-pandemic, or even during the pandemic? Now in Washington, D.C., Mayor Bowser, who unfortunately she couldn't be with us here today, but she's sending her appreciation and wishes us the best to this amazing event and summit. She's a huge promoter of our work, who acknowledged us just this past year for the things that we have done in helping create new consultants and spreading knowledge on diplomacy and human rights. And she announced that starting with Monday, we will be able to take the mask off indoor. And I'm so excited for that moment. So for now, let's call it post-pandemic. What are we going to do starting Monday? And how can we use not only us or not only you as, state actors, but also us as non-state actors, and the public, the citizens can use cultural diplomacy to rebuild that community stronger than ever. So let me start with Dr. Aktypis. I think you touched a bit on this subject in your speech, but if you would like to just add a couple more words to that.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I think that, during the pandemic, and let's assume that it is over, as you said, during the pandemic, we felt strong moments of solidarity among people. I mean, here in the States, but also across the world, in my own country, Greece, in Europe, everywhere. So there were these moments where people felt that really we are a small village, because we were all at home and we had to share. Actually, at the same time, we were somehow all confined, and this made us feel closer to each other. Plus, the threat, of the virus. It was before the therapeutics, and of course before the vaccines. So I think that what we need to do is first to celebrate through culture the fact that we are back. We have physical contact again. I mean, we meet in person with the other fellow human beings. This is the first step. So a celebratory, let's say, moment for all of us. And the ambassador mentioned it in the beginning, of course, the concerts and movie theaters, wherever we go, the restaurants. I joined here my colleague from Georgia. So, and on the other hand, we need also to build on what we probably achieved during the pandemic, this sense of solidarity, the need that we need to improve our societies, to fight, more effectively against discriminations, to uh, make societies more inclusive, and here, but everywhere in Greece, in the EU, this is our priority also in the European Union. And because otherwise we will not be able to fight effectively the repercussions of the pandemic, especially the economic and social, which are being felt still, and probably just the beginning. We need to work on this more. So there is public diplomacy is the common ground on which we all should build onwards. So this is my first thought about this issue.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Aktypis. Again, we are so honored and grateful to have you here and spread a bit of your knowledge, not only working as a diplomat, as a for your foreign service in Greece, but also as a international citizen. Because I'm sure you yourself have traveled the world into different areas to and had to accommodate yourself also to like the new technologies, new culture, new traditions also, but at the same time carrying it with you, an amazing tradition. And as you all know, we all love Greek music, Greek weddings, and so far. So we can wait to be able to also travel to go back to Greece and hopefully visit in person soon. Meanwhile, let's hope that in Washington DC we'll be able to at least interact and see each other in person. It is a pleasure to have you here and have met you in person as well, in virtual person, but then to meet together at the embassy or at our headquarters here. The same question right now, Mrs. Perez, can we use cultural diplomacy to rebuild this community, especially like an international community that promotes not only like the nation where you're from, but also helps bridge with other nations?
Of course. So my answer to your question is yes, definitely. So have you noticed that during the hardcore times of the pandemic, the only thing we were actually really doing was exploring culture online? So we were watching concerts, theater plays, movies, series, you name it. At the same time, there were no in-person events. I believe culture has really helped us to keep it together during the hardcore times. At the same time, doing events online helped us building new audiences. Before, the events were only in person. Our audience was the people who showed up at the events in Washington, D.C. With the events online, we now have, we not only have that, we have the people who spread out, who are spread out in the US or are interested in Portuguese culture in our case, people in Portugal and around the world. You see, even this summit is also an expression of that. So people that can actually go to our events online and see what we are doing. This is really a change of paradigm. I believe that the hybrid is the present and it will definitely be the future. So people gather together for what they like or are interested. We get clusters of people interested in certain topics, in our case, in the Portuguese culture. This can only bring a better understanding between people, and everyone gains in this situation. We are now stronger because we went through a pandemic and culture helped to survive it.
Well, thank you so much, Mrs. Perez. I agree with you, and I agree. You and both you and Dr. Aktypis talked about this paradigm shift, and also you bring up one more important thing, which I want to emphasize for our audience: the hybrid events. Okay, so we want to continue being able to also continue to use virtual events, virtual forums, virtual interactions like this one, so that we are not limited anymore by the boundaries of one state, one country, one nation. We can truly build up to that international community. Beautiful, beautiful. And I remember with pleasure every year, and actually it's supposed to coming up soon. Right now, probably we'll do it in virtual. I'm not sure. The Embassy Winterland that we do every year at the Ronald Reagan Center here in downtown Washington, D.C., where all the embassies get the opportunity to emphasize their culture and bring dancers, bring music, bring food from their own country. So I can't wait to participate again in those kind of events where I get to know and learn a bit more about the culture of each nation and each country. And for those who know me, I'm a foodie, so I like to try foods from every country in the world. So I think Mr. Dr. Aktypis mentioned about the culinary part as well. So definitely, I'm looking forward to that hybrid in-person and virtual interactions. Now, moving forward, would like to. I see Mr. Tour was able to rejoin the session. Hopefully, his internet will be stable enough to answer a bit from his perspective this question that the audience asked: how can we use cultural diplomacy to rebuild a stronger international community post-pandemic?
Yes, that's a very good question to bring up, and I would like to say that we have had enough virtual meetings for the past 2 years now. We really need to see in person, and I think the cultural diplomacy and bringing people from the different background is a new thing that we should do in person. I would say yes, we have had like we've been doing like this virtual. We've been living in this virtual world for the past 2 years, but again now we have to have the in-person meetings. You know what? There's a huge difference between meeting someone in person and then interacting with anyone virtually. So definitely, if we talk about the cultural diplomacy, I think that youth should be given safe spaces and international platforms to promote their cultures, to promote their values and their the national imperative. Likewise, His Excellency were talking about there's a difference between a cultural diplomacy and the nationality. So yes, these are like two different terms, and I think that if you be given a platform to exercise these two new normal, we be definitely engaging with more and diverse people with a whole new world, I would say, and we're really looking forward to. I think that USIDHR should start this, and the next summit next year should be in person to bring more people to talk about or experience cultural diplomacy.
Thank you, Mr. Tor. I'm so happy we were able to hear from you on this topic as well. Definitely, we are looking forward to our next year Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit, and I'm totally up for doing a hybrid event so that people don't necessarily have to travel to Washington, D.C. To see us in person, but I would like to be able to set up such a venue. As you know, I'm a very ambitious young woman leader that I want always to excel. So if last year we had over 10,000 people watching us, this year we had to go even bigger. So obviously next year we'll have to reinvent ourselves, come with innovative solutions to bring this summit here. So now we are going next to Mr. Giorgioliani from the Embassy of Georgia to the United States. Mr. Giorgioliani, you already addressed this question in particular in your speech. So if you'd like to add anything on that, if not, we can go on to the next question.
I just want to echo Ms. Pires and Mr. Aktypis. This has been, we had the similar challenges, I believe, with the embassy work here in DC. But as Ms. Pires said, we had a chance to find the new audiences with our online movie screenings and online events. And that is one positive aspect that the only positive aspect, I would say, it's a bad thing to say, but the pandemic has brought that it raised the awareness of these Zoom meetings and in general, the virtual meetings. Because earlier, pre-pandemic, as I remember, Zoom meetings and online meetings were not considered, they were considered a bit more, viewed as more skeptically than in-person meetings. So that has cut the distance between peoples, and having those kind of interactions more frequently is not a bad step. I would say it's a positive aspect.
Well, definitely, and I appreciate for echoing them and adding up to more to that paradigm shift as well. Not to put you on the spot, but I would like to hear your thoughts on the next question that was emphasized throughout the comment section here. How would you, in your viewpoint, it doesn't even have to be like necessarily like an official position, but from your viewpoint, how can regular citizens aid you in your mission and help promote cultural diplomacy? Let's say for the Georgian people who are joining us from Georgian universities, how would you advise them to promote cultural diplomacy of Georgia? We cannot. Okay.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my speech, I mean, speaking of Georgian soft power, it's always, you cannot overstate the importance of Georgian cuisine and Georgian food, Georgian wine, and every Georgian, I would say, has this like proud moment to be Georgian. And wherever we go, we emphasize about our culture and our history, and we're proud to do that. And having that aspect and promoting that everywhere we go is very important for us, for all Georgians. So I would say, having that and maintaining that Georgian spirit is vital to promote cultural diplomacy around the world.
Thank you so much for that very quick remarks from Dr. Aktypis before he needs to leave for another commitment that he has to go to, and then we'll get to hear from Ms. Pires as well.
Yeah, again, like Joseph, I agree absolutely with what he said. We need also to bring in our citizens, and not only the citizens of our own country, all citizens of the world. That is culture about. Culture is about sharing. And coming from a country, where we have, let's say, a long history of thousands of years, sorry, we do not really feel that we are, the owners of this heritage. We share the heritage with the humanity. So the same applies to all form of arts today, and this is our role: is to bring to the international audience what our country has to offer, and this is about sharing. It's not about promoting in a very, exclusive way what we are doing, that we're superior to the others, etc. So that's what I would like to stress here: the fact that we want to show what you're doing, and because by exchanging cultural exchange, we are all present. We are all here to share, and it is about peace, about values, about core values, also about humanity, human beings, and it's not only about creativity, which is very objective and has nothing to do with feelings and emotions, as the ambassador mentioned in the beginning. We need to bring more emotions in our world, but in a positive way. We need to bring more, more reality in what we are doing, and less virtual reality in the bad way, like through social media, etc. So this is, I think, one of the core missions of what we are doing here and what we are talking about.
Definitely, I totally agree with those remarks. We all have to do our best to make sure we continue to promote our works, our activities, our countries, our nations as well, even wherever we go, because that follows us through generations. So thank you so much, Dr. Aktypis. I know you have to log off right now. I appreciate the intervention. The last we go to Mrs. Pires. Thank you so much. What is your answer? How can we actually, or how can the public in here, students from Portugal, for example, promote Portugal?
So I believe, in my understanding, I believe that every citizen is an ambassador of its own country. It is a responsibility, and it is a possibility every citizen should try to explore if they haven't tried yet already. I had regular citizens coming up with ideas of how to promote our country and our culture, even the Portuguese American culture, for instance. To give you an example, there is an annual gala of the Portuguese American Leadership Council of the United States. It's called PALCOS, that is a Portuguese American organization. Last year, one of the members came up with an idea to do a virtual Portuguese American art gallery. And at the Embassy of Portugal, we promptly embraced the project with other organizations. We launched it last year at their gala. We started off small, but now we have 17 artists in the Portuguese American Art Gallery.com. It is a project that I have seen growing. Each month, I co-moderate with someone from Palcos a Meet the Artist session where we interview one artist at a time on Zoom and a Facebook Live. It has been very interesting for me to know these artists' artwork, their stories of immigration, how the Portuguese culture influenced them and is still important for them. It has been a learning process for me that I really value and appreciate. This is just an example of how an idea from one individual can become a big project, supported by some institutions. The Portuguese American community in the US, the American people who visit Portugal, learn Portuguese, are interested in our music, art, literature, film, gastronomy, architecture, etc. They definitely help us promote cultural diplomacy. They are our allies and our supporters as well.
Thank you so much. What wonderful words. Definitely words of wisdom, because I feel it's so important nowadays to bring up all this in all our cultures, and not only by attending and participating to even but actively engaging with one another. You know, oftentimes even before the pandemic, we used to go like at conferences and just stay in a corner, not interacting with anyone, not trying to learn about their culture, the nation. I'm always fascinated about those things. I'm always, one that breaks the ice, if we want to call it like that, that goes and interacts with people. And for our young generation who's watching us from home, and students, and even those who are professionals right now in the field, working in the business world, it's so important to kind of like respect the cultural norms also of every country. If I was to add an input on how can regular citizens help promote cultural diplomacy, first of all, you need to educate yourself about what cultural diplomacy means, about your country, your culture, and as Mr. Dr. Aktypis was saying, we just need to make sure now, with the use of social media, we use it with care to not spread misinformation. The world is full of out there of fake news, misinformation, and it's so easy, to share, violations, for example, of human rights. But what can we do as advocates, as to come up with solution? And one of the solutions that I found through my, decade career working both human rights field, in diplomacy, interacting with ambassador diplomats all over the world, is that education is key to everything that we must handle in society. That's why at USIDHR we came up with this course on diplomatic protocol and etiquette, which not only ambassadors and diplomats from all around the world, when they get to the mission, do the course or graduate the course, but also it's open for the general public as well, in order for teaching them and helping them understand that diplomacy is not something that you have to be born with. First of all, you all went to schools and the foreign service to actually get through the ladders of the career. But also it's something that every regular citizen can practice it on a daily basis. And I know you agree with me that you observe these things. When like a person knows how to use the correct forms of address, or know how to introduce, in a particular person in a specific section. So that's kind of like my viewpoint on how we can, as help promote cultural diplomacy in general. And also, obviously, don't talk bad about any country, because there are people all around the world who are trying to do something good, something to promote their countries. Now, I don't want to generalize and say everyone in this world is good, but I want to tell you from my personal own viewpoint and experience, is not necessarily an opinion expressed by the entire board, let's say at the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights. But I want to mention the fact that so many people in governments are unaware about some issues in this world. And our job as younger generations, as leaders, is to help them, aid them in their mission, help them promote the good things. I always hear bad stuff about a country. Like, I don't want to specify a specific nation, but it's like this nation is full of thieves, this nation is doing that, this nation. We need to stop doing that, and we need to promote the good parts. Talk about the Georgian wine, talk about the European Union, talk about the United States, talk about the Pakistani good things that are happening, and there are good and bad things happening in every country. And unfortunately, this is the world we are living in. It's a challenging nation, it's a challenging world. However, it's our role to come up together and provide the solution part, like come up with solution how we can do that. And one thing that I found out, it's education, educating others. Start with your own network. Let's say your friends, your family. Hey, I just watched this amazing second day annual summit at the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights. I got to hear from some amazing diplomats from Washington, D.C. about their cultures. Did you know that Georgia, has a great wine and things like that? This is your role right now. And I want you to kind of like, before we transition to the next panel, I want to take this very short minute to, again, thank you all. Thank you to His Excellency Ambassador Javorshik, who was with us, Dr. Aktypis, Mrs. Perez, and Mr. Giorgio Liani and Mr. Tour for joining us from different corners of your offices, your homes, your countries as well. It was a real pleasure. I actually had enjoyed this session very, very much. I don't know if the audience was able to sense this and feel this. I'm always speaking from my heart. I don't have to come be prepared necessarily with the speech, because I love this kind of interaction, and I'm so grateful that I was able to feature you today. Wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll get together in Washington, D.C. all together soon, and then next year at the third annual summit. So any closing remarks? And before that, I just want to let my team know that we are preparing for the second panel of the day, which is on economic diplomacy, moderated by President Manuel Oancia. We will be returning in a couple of minutes after all the other panelists for the next panel have joined. So any closing remarks?
I just wanna...
sorry. No, go ahead.
I just want to thank you, Isabelle, and USIDHR for the work you do, and we are looking forward as an embassy to continue working with you in other capacities as well, and looking forward to the next year's session in person or hybrid, as you said.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Giorgio Liani. Send my regards to His Excellency Ambassador Bakaraze. He's a very good friend. We've been, engaging for a couple of years here in Washington, D.C. I really appreciate you being here with us today, Ms. Pires.
Yes, I wanted to thank you, of course, for this panel and for everything. And I wanted to ask you if you could give our contacts, at least my contact, to the audience, because some of the people were asking for the contacts. So I don't know if you can share with them. I cannot share on the comments. So you can give my email, or you can find me on the website of the Embassy of Portugal in Washington, D.C.
If you'd like to share with them, you just have to put it in our chat here, and I'll direct it to my team, who's going to post it publicly so that everyone has your contact.
Okay, and okay, I'm writing it right here, right now, in our private chat, and then you can share it with them. Yes, and I wanted to thank you and Manuel Oancia for the invitation. It was really nice being here. It was really a pleasure. Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure and honor also to have you here. Thank you for your beautiful messages, for reminding us about the Fado music and all the cultural great things that you've done. Congratulations at the embassy. I'm looking forward to see you in person next time, and His Excellency as well. Thank you, Sandra. Mr. Tour?
Thank you so much for being here, I would like to say, and it was really insightful to learn more about Georgia, Portugal, and other countries as well. I think we need a bigger, more panel so we can learn more about the countries, but it's the limitation of time. So thank you so much once again for coming and inviting me also, and we're really looking forward to see you in person in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
as well. Thank you so much. Thank you all again for tuning in and watching this session. We are getting ready to bring you the last panel of the day, an amazing distinguished guest on on economic diplomacy, moderated by our president, Mr. Manuel Oancia. And I will see you towards the end. We will be returning in a couple of minutes. So the team, please don't leave the feed. Just take a few moments, take a sip of water, get outside the room for a second and come back with us in a few minutes. We are going to be back in about 5 minutes with the next panelist for the economic diplomacy section. Thank you all to our distinguished guests here for joining for the first cultural diplomacy panel discussion.
Oh,
Hello again. This is Isabelle Vladoiu, founder of USIDHR, and it's my pleasure to introduce you and bring you the next panel of discussion on economic diplomacy. The panel is going to be moderated by the president of USIDHR, Mr. Manuel Oancia. Manuel Oancia has been a strategic advisor for more than 20 years to respected entrepreneurs, influential people in top Forbes companies like Motorola, Ford, GM, and General Electric. He's recognized for his outstanding leadership and experience in international business strategies while serving as the president of one of the largest networks of chambers of commerce, the International Union of Bilateral Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Oancia engaged in dialogue and collaborated with President Obama, the Trump administration, and high-level foreign diplomats working on strengthening the relationships among diplomatic, government, and corporate leaders. In 2015, he received the IUBCCI Star and Merit Award for Economic Diplomacy in recognition of the outstanding contribution in promoting bilateral economic diplomacy. He's currently serving as the president of the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, overseeing our operations in over 26 countries. So right now, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce and allow him to share more about the next panel of discussion and introduce you the next panelist, Mr. Manuel Oancia, President of U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Ms. Isabel, for a great introduction. It's an honor for me to be in the second day. When on the second day, it's amazing. You know, after we have a beautiful first day of the summit with distinguished guests, and today. Good afternoon, distinguished guests and participants watching us from over the world. It's my pleasure to be here with you today and host the next session on day second of the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021 on the subject of economic diplomacy. I ask, our production team, to let our guests, to join me on the panel. Because we want to make sure, nobody has a technical situation. Production team, please let our guest panels and because today it's one of my this is it's a great topic, and economic diplomacy also, how Ms. Vladoiu said, welcome welcome. Let me start with Her Excellency Brody Sinclair and His Excellency Dr. Fernando Lorca Castro. Welcome. Also, Mr. Brody Sinclair and also Dr. Abalach Nazardine and Mr. Arben Bilali. His Excellency, Ambassador from Cameroon, has some technical issues. We find out, when you put everything together, and try to say, okay, what we miss something, when people, they don't have, Facebook accounts or, Google accounts, we have this kind of situation, which we didn't expect it. But hey, I welcome everyone. I will give you, thank you so much and welcome. Before I will give you each panelist 5 to 7 minutes to discuss their work in relation to the topic of the session. I will introduce each of you, and in the end, we will engage in conversation and economic diplomacy and answer some questions from the public. But and I hope you guys were okay with that. For that said, I want to also to say to the public, to our participants from over the globe, to this panel on economic diplomacy, which are watching, live stream today on social media, a few words about economic diplomacy. In today's world, economic diplomacy will be an important tool for national leaders in strengthening international relations. The goal of this strategy is to help countries recover from financial crisis and provide them with a change as success by implementing reforms that may have political costs, but ultimately strengthen economics because they work best when implemented quickly before other nations recognize the opportunity as well. As the competition among technological giants has intensified, we notice that technology policy is now, and I notice, the technology policy is now a top United States international priority, and not just some passing detail for entrepreneurs to ignore or deplore as they had during previous era of economic expansionism. The rapid growth of information technology in recent decades has created an entirely new set of challenges, from national security threats like cyber attacks on critical infrastructure systems such as electrical power grids and banking networks, to privacy concern over how hackers steal personal data from devices we use every day, to business issue concerning that tax firms should be employed when making decision about which customers loans based, and how to manage that on the safety way. In a speech at that give me, to relate to the speech at the Global Emerging Technology Summit in July 2021, when Secretary Blinken told attendees about his experience in this rainbow approach between technology and diplomacy. Quote, "I needed scientists and technologists in the room just to tell me whether I need scientists and technologists in the room to help identify the problems and help identify some of the solution. And I become more and more convinced that virtually everything on our agenda is some tech or science or innovation component to the solution." Close quotes. Right now, the technology threat is now the prime determinant of economic, political, and military power. I think that is, I want to create this kind of introduction before we will start with to introduce, our distinguished Her Excellency Brody Sinclair, and Ambassador has an extensive experience and has worked in international trade as well as security issues, military and bilateral issues in her long career within as Lining Minister of Foreign Affairs. Her Excellency has served as the Ambassador of Ireland to the United States since September 2019. She is the first woman to be appointed Ambassador of Iceland to the United States. Despite the pandemic, the Embassy of Iceland is working towards exchanging ties and cooperation with the United States in various fields, including trade and investment, security and defense, as well as the green energy, gender equality, and human rights issues. Before taking up the position in Washington, Her Excellency was the permanent representative of Iceland to the United Nations. Previously, she headed the mission of the Iceland to the European Union, and was the ambassador to Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. In 2012, she was the chief negotiator and finalizer of the first European Free Trade Agreement with China. Between 2007 and 2012, Her Excellency was Deputy Secretary General of the European Free Trade Association. Other positions include Director General for International Security and Development Cooperation Affairs and Foreign Affairs Advisor to the Prime Minister of Iceland. Welcome, Your Excellency, and looking forward, for 5-7 minutes speech, and after that we will go with the questions. Thank you. Can you hear me? Just unmute.
Yes. You hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yes, very good.
After 2 years of pandemic, we're still, having problems with technology. It's amazing. And thank you very much for this very thorough introduction. I see I must contact my assistant and have her shorten it a bit so that the introductions are not so long. And thank you very much for inviting me to be here today and speak on this very important topic. I mean, all the world economies or the interest of the world economies are more or less interlinked, and therefore, in our view, it's paramount to not just have clear rules for global trade, but also mechanisms that ensure that all states follow the same guidelines. And economic diplomacy is therefore very important for the global competitiveness and the prosperity of countries, and not the least for a small island state like Iceland, with a very open economy and being very highly dependent on international trade. And so free and fair trade, you can say, are the foundation of our economic success and general welfare. And for that reason, we have long put international trade as the core of our economic and foreign policy. And in order for our companies to compete in the global market, the key is to ensure a level and predictable playing field. For a small country like Iceland, a rule-based multilateral trading system is central to our foreign policy, and because we will never have the muscle to force others to bow to our interests. So we spent a large part of our diplomatic resources on negotiating trade agreements with other countries and on defending the global system. And this is why we have strongly supported the WTO and its dispute settlement together with other European countries and also recently with the United States. And although the WTO may in many ways may have faults and the dispute settlement system is a long way from being perfect, it nevertheless provides us a process to settle arguments which otherwise would simply be settled by power. Economic diplomacy will be key in the coming decades, in our view. And the growing, you mentioned the importance of services and world trade, and in particular the massive power of high-tech corporations, which exceeds those of most countries. So we thought it was a very good start when recently the G7 tax deal was reached to have a minimum corporate tax of 15%. We have also negotiated a very comprehensive agreement with the European Union, which allows us to participate in the internal market, while still we can keep our sovereignty and control over, for example, our fishing grounds, which is very important. And we have, with our EFTA partners, negotiated about 40 free trade agreements in many years. And we also, of course, speak regularly with our US partners, and we try to convince them that a trade agreement with Iceland would be beneficial to both countries. But in our eyes, also such an agreement can also be a strategic instrument, and that does not only apply to Iceland but other countries. So economic diplomacy can also link to security and defense diplomacy. But more importantly, maybe in the wake of this long-standing pandemic, we are faced with numerous challenges, but also some opportunities. And as we have to rethink and rebuild our economies to build back better, greener, and more inclusive. And it's important that we collectively focus our economic diplomacy towards a global recovery response that focuses on climate action, human rights, gender equality, and universal health care. And such ensuring that individuals and nations can prosper and reach their full potential. And I think COP26 has been a very stark reminder about the urgent need to step up efforts in transition to green energy as an essential halt to climate change. And we have an opportunity to focus on green investments, green job creation when rebuilding our economies, and thereby support green growth to address the climate crisis. And here Iceland has a success story to tell. But international, but Iceland we also promote economic diplomacy through our development cooperation, which is an overarching objective to reduce poverty and hunger and promote general well-being based on human rights, gender equality, sustainability, including through sustainable use of resources. In recent years, we have put increased focus on the role of the private sector in its development, in our development cooperation, and we all know that the SDG, or the Sustainable Development Goals, will not be reached without the participation and the investments from the private sector. And as always, gender equality is one of the cornerstones in Iceland's foreign policy and in our development cooperation. We need to keep in mind that the gender equality and women's empowerment benefit us all and lead to greater prosperity for everyone, which makes it an important part of economic diplomacy and is a red thread in all our economic outreach programs. So I think that in promoting equality and supporting women's economic empowerment, including in girls' education, we are investing in the economies of the future. So that is just my kind of short input into the discussion. Thank you very much.
Yes, no, thank you so much, Your Excellency. You know, for this kind of message. You know, I totally agree. You know, right now, you know what you're saying. You know, I was one of the person, you know, working with President Obama, and, you know, in TTP, and also, you know, with the free trade with Europe. I totally understand, you know, right now after the pandemic and this kind of situation, and also, you know, our strong desire, you know, to work, you know, to find a new way, you know, jobs, you know, and the green jobs, you know, to point what you pointed very well with a new mission to save the earth, you know, and the climate change. I think everyone is understand that, and I think realize, you know, if we are not doing that, we will put you know, every security in jeopardy. And thank you so much for the kind words. And right now, let me introduce His Excellency Dr. Fernando. Dr. Fernando Yorca Castro, Ambassador of the Republic of Costa Rica to the United States.
Thank you. Hello, it's a pleasure to be part of this Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021, organized by the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights.
Yes, and Your Excellency, let me introduce you. You know, because you have for audience and everyone to understand. You know, you President Carlos Salvador Quesera name you. You know, the ambassador at on August 1st, 2018, and present the credential to President Donald J. Trump on September 17 in the same year. Your Excellency, you have dedicated himself, you know, to serving Costa Rica to various capacities. 12-year experience in international development through Europe. Previously, Your Excellency held prominent position in transitional organization, health policy advisor, medical and research manager, and primary care medical practitioner in Spain and Costa Rica. Moreover, Your Excellency also worked as a registered medical disability analyst in Kingdom. In 2014, you are appointed ex-president by the ex-president Luis Guillermo Solis Rivera as the Deputy Minister of Health. Shortly thereafter, become the Minister and the Steward of the Health, Nutrition, and Sports sector in Costa Rica, where you established. You right now you are here. Thank you so much, and you are. It's an honor to have you, and also, you know, we know each other also from the Economic Diplomats Club, which we started that in 2019. Welcome, and the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. I wanna thank the institute founders, you, Mr. Manuel Oancia, and also Isabelle Vladoiu, for the invitation. I would like to share with you my experience as the ambassador to the White House in this economic diplomacy panel. And also, I would like to share with you the Costa Rican institutions' approach to new opportunities and how they take advantage of them to develop this economic diplomacy. Um, Costa Rica understands this as the best way to take advantage of our country capabilities, which means attracting foreign direct investment, ecotourism, medical and well-being tourism, and promoting our social values based on a strong democracy since 1989. Costa Rica has evolved in terms of social principles such as human rights, freedom, public health care with universal coverage since the 70s, free and mandatory basic education for boys and girls since 1870, and without army since 1948, just to mention a few. I want to share with you a specific case example of the way we apply economic diplomacy principles in Costa Rica. Adolescent pregnancy without the support of the family or the society condemns the mother, the child, and the rest of the family to poverty. This is the reason why on September 6, 2019, in Washington, D.C., I decided to share with the Potomac Exchange Group member the amazing experience of Costa Rica reducing teen pregnancy rate through a successful public and private partnership between the government and Bayer, the chemical industry, and in addition to the support of the Inter-American Development Bank. The project was designed by the bank specialist team and the Ministry of Health between 2012 and 2014. It was called the Mesoamerican Health Initiative back then. And between 2014 and 2018, this plan was implemented, acting as Minister of Health and chair of the Social Security Institution, as you already mentioned. And thanks to the successful execution of this project, Costa Rica's teen pregnancy rate dropped from 15.1% in 2016 to 10.2% in 2020, which represents near 5% drop nationwide since 2016. Mr. Matthias Beringer, Vice President of Global Public and Governmental Affairs of Bayer, based here in Washington, D.C., was present during this promotion of Costa Rica event where I explained our experience on this. And we started to work together with our team of the Embassy of Costa Rica to the US and with representatives of CIMDE, the Investment Promotion Agency of Costa Rica, and even the President Carlos Alvarado Quesada was involved to make it real, what actually they announced. With Mr. Christian Albert Mayer, President and CEO of Bayer, Andean country, Central American and the Caribbean, country division head of pharmaceuticals. Recently in Costa Rica, he announced this in his own words: the investment of over 400 million euros to support the construction of a new production site in Costa Rica and the expansion of production capabilities with a new facility in Turku, Finland. Bayer emphasized our commitment to help provide 100 million women in low and middle income countries with access to modern family planning by 2030, in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For our point of view, this is a great experience of economic diplomacy with a real win-win situation for everyone. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Your Excellency. Wow, such a nice story. And also, I want to acknowledge, here, Costa Rica recently, adapt the Universal Declaration, to be teaching in school, and that it's another bravo, congratulations. It's unique, which people will say, okay. That will also it will create an impact and also in economic diplomacy, and congratulations for this kind of projects with success, which wishing you the success for this initiative, especially in the health right now, which any country wants to not compete but to implement to the level. And also what is important, to send that communication to any to own population, to understand, what is the good and the need, to work towards. Next guest, and it's a pleasure to have, New Zealand. It's Mr. Brody Sinclair. Welcome, and let me introduce him. Mr. Brody Sinclair is a trade and economic consular, Embassy of New Zealand to the United States. Mr. Brody has arrived in June 2019 for 4 years assignment. During his more than 10 years with New Zealand Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Mr. Brody has extensive experience in trade negotiation and trade-related issues. Most recently, he was New Zealand's deputy senior official for the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-TTP Trans-Pacific Partnership process followed the U.S. withdrawal from TTP. He also had primary responsibility for goods issue across all the New Zealand's complete free trade agreements. He previously served in Seoul as First Secretary Trade and Economic at the time when the Korea and New Zealand Free Trade Agreement was concluded and entered into force. Prior to joining the ministry, Mr. Brody had a career as a business and political journalist. Mr. Brody is a graduate of University of Auckland, where he gained a Master of Arts in History and a Bachelor of Science in Statistics. In addition, he has a diploma in journalism from Massey University. Mr. Brody, welcome. It's a pleasure. We work in the same field, TTP and those kind of trade, and you are an expert. And welcome. And the floor is yours.
Oh, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. That's hello everyone in New Zealand's Indigenous language, Māori. And thank you very much for the opportunity to join the panel today and provide some perspectives from New Zealand. I'm going to focus my remarks a bit on three things. One is what the drivers are for New Zealand's kind of trade and economic policy, how that's shaped what we have done most recently, and finally, how we keep track and know whether we're being successful or not. So starting with the drivers and some context, New Zealand's a nation of 5 million people. We're in a far corner of the world, and the outline that Iceland's ambassador gave could very much be sort of similar talking points to what New Zealand does as well, as a sort of a small nation in need of open markets and clear global trading rules. New Zealand's very fortunate to have a good climate and environment that's very suitable for growing agriculture, horticulture and fisheries. And we do that so well that we actually export 95% of the food that we produce. On top of that, we've developed a sort of a sophisticated economy as well now. We produce pharmaceuticals, semiconductor parts. We've even got a space launch program now, as well as successful global cloud service companies. So overall, 1 in 4 New Zealand jobs is tied to trade in some way. So our standard of living is very reliant on trading and exporting to other nations. That said, New Zealand has still had members of the public questioning our trade and economic policies in a very similar way to what's happening here in the United States as well. And that really flared up a lot around the end of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, negotiations, and the idea in some of the public's mind that free trade agreements really only serve the interests of multinational companies. The New Zealand government at the time took a lot of note of that, and agreed with public opinion that it was really important goal that trade agreements ensure that the benefits that they deliver are broadly spread through society and not concentrated in just a few. So in response to that, the first thing we as a government did was, stopped kind of dismissing those thoughts and opinions as ill-informed, and we actually took time to listen to what those complaints were. And what we heard clearly was, this concern and worry about corporations through trade agreements being given more rights than others. People were also worried about trade's impact on the environment and what influence it was having on climate change. We heard from smaller businesses that, they don't have the resources to navigate the complexities of trade agreements and take advantage of them. And we heard from some groups that they weren't being consulted enough along the process of those negotiations, and they didn't feel like they had enough say on issues that had an impact and an effect on them. So that consultation process, which was quite extensive throughout the country and under the banner of Trade for All, resulted in us taking some changes. Some of those changes were about stopping things that we were doing. An example of that is the government made a commitment not to include investor-state dispute settlement provisions in any future agreements it signed on to. It also led to us pursuing and prioritising some things in existing agreements that we, that we weren't doing before. And again, an example of that would be to include, say, an Indigenous cooperation chapter in our free trade agreements. This started with an agreement with Taiwan, but it's continued now in our negotiations that we're having with, say, the likes of the United Kingdom. We also made sure that in some of our agreements we were building in more capacity building and development support. And some examples of this are the agreement that we share with Australia with the ASEAN countries. And similarly, we've got a shared agreement with Australia with the Pacific Island nations. And in both of those cases, we've committed some development funding to ensure that the nations that are part of that agreement can be supported to be able to trade not just with New Zealand and Australia, but also with third countries as well, and be able to deliver on the commitments of the agreement. And we think that's important for maintaining that social license of trade, not just in New Zealand, but also in those countries that we've partnered with. And finally, it also led us to think creatively and do some new agreements, some new things. Examples of that would be we've concluded a trade and gender instrument with Canada, Chile, and Mexico has also come on board, and that commits us to working together on those issues, having ongoing dialogues about it, supporting women entrepreneurs on trade missions. A second thing that we have done, which is relatively new, is focused on sector-specific kind of digital agreements. We've done the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement with Singapore, Chile, and now South Korea has come on board on that as well. And that's got some hard rules around e-commerce and digital trade, but it also includes things like digital inclusion, and says that we'll work together on issues where there aren't yet standards in place, like AI, but it's very important to get those standards right and to make sure that ethical considerations are also brought into play as we develop those standards domestically. And the final sort of new type of agreement that I want to mention, and it's fitting to do so here because actually Iceland and Costa Rica are part of that agreement. It's the agreement on climate change, trade and sustainability that we're negotiating. As long with Costa Rica and Iceland, there's also Switzerland, Norway and Fiji that are part of that group. And for the past, I think 18 months or so, we've been negotiating that agreement, which again tries to use trade to address an issue like climate change together. And we're all very passionate about that, making that happen. So this agreement or this negotiation covers fossil fuel subsidies and trying to phase those out. It includes talk about environmental goods and services, and also it's covering eco-labelling guidelines. And the idea is that as a group, we'll try and settle on some provisions there that we can all agree to. We can then see if other economies want to join that agreement, or we can look at other issues that we can expand out over time. And the final section that I want to mention is, how do we know that we're being successful? How do we know that we're on track? And there's just two things I'll mention there. One is, we need to maintain those conversations with groups around the country. So not make that dialogue and listening to people a one-off exercise. So we are making sure that we are consulting regularly with groups around the country. In some cases, that has resulted in us forming particular kind of representative groups. There's an Indigenous Māori trade group now that our minister and our government can kind of consult with. But it's also just regular conversations and making sure through those regular conversations we're not excluding particular groups. And the second part of it is what we discovered is that we're not very good at collecting data at a level that would enable us to know whether our trade agreements and policies are actually working for particular groups. In the past, we've relied on aggregate data to make claims about trade agreements being good for New Zealand and in the national interest. But what we've started to do is start to dig a bit deeper and make sure that we're collecting and analysing data for women or for Indigenous groups in particular. And in that process, we have formed what we've called the Inclusive Trade Action Group, which includes Canada, Mexico, and Chile. And together we're sharing best practice and developing techniques together that will enable us to collect that data better and identify where policies are working and where there are still gaps and existing rules that are not working for all groups. So with that, I'll leave my opening comments there, but certainly looking forward to questions, and thank you again for the opportunity to join the panel.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brandy. Thank you so much again, Mr. Brandy. Wow, such a valuable sharing, on these trades, especially, I take some notes, especially, with indigenous, and especially, focus on, on the leadership, to push, to have women to get more role in this kind of, to be part of this. And also, the AI, which right now it's closer to technology. We try to understand how we embrace the technology and how to move forward. Such a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much. And we will come back, how I said, with the questions. And right now, let me introduce Dr. Abdal Nasardi, the Economic Attaché, Embassy of Lebanon to United States. Dr. Abdallah is the Economic Attaché at the Embassy of Lebanon to the United States, and he mainly worked in the area of economics and business development. Also, he was Assistant Dean of the Faculty of Business Administration at Beirut Arab University, where he was the Accreditation Officer for Academic Development. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Kent in England. He taught at several universities in the UK, such as Westminster Business School at the University of Greenwich. He also taught several courses at the American University in Beirut, and he was business development manager for a large distribution company in West Africa, and he was focused mainly on Philips Electronics. He served as the consulate for numerous respect organization and policy analyst. Dr. Abdallah Nazir, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us to this economic diplomacy panel. The floor is yours. Thank you. Can you hear us? And you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel. And I would like to thank the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights for organizing this very timely forum with all the changes related to sustainable development and digital trade and all those changes happening at the moment. And for inviting me to join this panel along with your esteemed speakers and dear ambassadors. In my 5 minutes intervention, I would like to share several points on economic diplomacy in relation to my everyday work. So I think economic diplomacy in the context of my country, I think is very important. In what sense? It should be a priority for all countries in the world in order to be used as a tool to build bridges in order to create those economic linkages that can bring mutual interest between countries and that could lead actually to prosperity and peace. As we said, usually when goods cross borders, weapons stop. And I think trade could be used as one of those tools to bring more peace. And I think also every country has its own model of economic diplomacy. And at the Directorate of Economy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Lebanon, we've tried over the last few years to develop our own kind of model, despite all the problems we're facing. And those models are actually not replicable. So it will actually depend primarily on the country's main economic strategic agenda, as I will explain in a minute, and basically how much they have political leverage on the international scene. For example, very briefly, we didn't have a very good experience in Lebanon with most of the trade agreement we had with partners. Lebanon actually suffered a lot in terms of trade balance, and that has affected actually the economy of the country and actually led partly to the current economic crisis we're facing. All what I want to highlight here is if economic diplomacy is not well developed, and if there is not a very strong collaboration between policymakers in the country itself and the embassies around the world, and there is a very clear vision, then it could fire back at your economy eventually. And that's a very important point, a lesson learned. Another point here is that economic diplomacy definitely have different facets, and one of them is commercial. There are some aspects that geopolitical, there also are policy and trade development, and in our case we cannot focus on everything. Recently, in the last few years, in the case of Lebanon, our main focus has been on the commercial aspects in order to be able to help our productive sectors. So our role at the moment is mainly focused on developing market opportunities through trade and investment in order to support our productive sectors in Lebanon during the crisis. So the role of my role today as an economic attaché is primarily a business development role, working closely with the private sector and funding organizations, and creating business linkages on the daily basis. We have had actually in the last few years tremendous success at this level with this approach with our trade and investment linkages with the United States. An example of collaboration in the policy aspect, and here I urge again more and more collaboration between countries, and this forum is a good example for that. Is, for example, the GSP Alliance that includes 27 countries that benefit from the GSP system to have their products entering the United States custom-free. This alliance, through cooperation and through coordination, have generated interest to the United States administration to reactivate actually the GSP system, as we saw this past week with the renewed focus of the Congress on passing the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, which would include actually a renewal of the GSP system and the benefits program, and also the miscellaneous tariff bill. Finally, I would like to highlight a very important point based also on my experience in that field, is trust. And I think trust with your citizens back home, and I think Mr. Sinclair has pointed to this, communication with your productive sector, your companies, association, cooperatives, your ecosystem back home is very important in order to be able to succeed in your mission and economic diplomacy. And that communication must always happen in order to make sure that what you're doing actually is bringing benefits and not firing back at them. And this actually is pointed out, but recently the USTR ambassador in the United States, Ambassador Tai, put it on the 3rd November, speaking at Georgetown University Law Center. Trade policy sits at the intersection, and I quote Her Excellency, trade policy sits at the intersection of domestic and foreign policy. So the policies we develop must be calibrated with our broader agenda. But we have seen over time that trade policy becomes unsustainably fragile when it becomes detached from the issues facing ordinary working people. And I think that point we are trying to highlight here. So later in her remarks, actually, she also highlighted the importance of building trust, and mainly trust with the government and its citizens in order to succeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Mancia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. You know, this is great remarks. You know, you pointed very well. You know why we need. I will start also. You know, to meet. You know, together. You know, invite to each of you. You know, to Economic Diplomat Club. You know, which we started in 2019, because we want also. You know, to create that kind of a friendship between. You know. Civil society, you know, non-profit organizations, you know, and also non-state actors and state actors, you know, to help on these trade agreements or free trade agreements, you know, to support that, and that will create a good opportunity for us to be to work to have the same goals, you know, because that is important. If the civil society is not engaged in that, you know, and only on the state level, that will create, you know, a gap in the communication and in implementation of those projects. to move forward, I'm seeing, some of the guests, they have some urgency, and I think they come back where they have technical problem. But let's move to the next questions, which, by the way, if when you have time, you look, our participants, they're very excited about to have you here, and thank you so much from that, to be here, and they are very happy to listen to you and understand what is economic diplomacy. How it doesn't matter what kind of size of country is, how they want to move, what kind of projects are. And the next questions, from the panel was, how can we use economic diplomacy to strengthen international relations? And I repeat, how can we use economic diplomacy to strengthen international relations? And I know few you touched that, but let's first, with Her Excellency, to start. Just unmute. I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and I thank all of you who. I mean, it's been a really interesting panel, even if I think it also the panel shows that economic diplomacy is so many things. It's and from each country's perspective also different things. So I find it very interesting to hear what the others in the panel have had to say, and I think I will have to have a meeting with you, Mr. Sinclair, at one point to hear more about the new way of the kind of the new initiatives when it comes to free trade agreements, because I think we can all agree that some aspects of free trade agreements is quite outdated, has not kind of so that initiative that you mentioned that we're all participating in on the sustainability, and I think that's a good example of where we're moving towards. I mean, these days it's not the tariffs that are the biggest obstacle in trade between countries. So it was very interesting. I mean, how we can. I think if we talk about economic diplomacy in terms of trade or economic cooperation and ties, I think there's nothing better than the closer the ties between countries, the interdependence between countries. I mean, that reduces greatly the likelihood of conflict. So I think that's a very important aspect of economic international economic diplomacy. And even if we're not part of the European Union, I mean, the European Union, I think, is a classic example of that, of how the coal and steel community at the time was formed to lay down clear rules for the market and to avoid war between these countries. And now, 75 years later, I mean, at least that approach has shown how important these close economic ties between these countries are, and I think that can be transposed or transferred to other areas, in the economic diplomacy.
Wow, excellent. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And I also the same question, for His Excellency Dr. Fernando Yorca Castro, please.
Thank you. Yes, of course. The answer is yes. We can bring opportunities to the table to show where complementary economies can work together with their own public and private organizations to solve mutual problems or to face problems that they have or that someone else got. Some companies definitely need access to human talent to be able to manufacture, to develop their own products, And for example, in some countries, unemployment is it's a reality. It's a huge problem. And of course, with economic diplomacy and working together, we can make things possible to improve people's lives in their own countries. And if they are able to find jobs and to improve their quality of life, a lot of people will actually forget the idea of fleeing social threats and trying to migrate somewhere else. Definitely, we believe that economic diplomacy is a great work, a great way to reduce forced migration, for example, in the world. And at the same time, well, Costa Rica has been working hard to develop a lot of trade agreements. Actually, we have at least 15 international trade agreements, and we strongly believe, like some of you already mentioned, that is the best way to find this the best way to complement our economies with some countries.
Yes.
So thank you so much.
Yes, no, I totally agree, Your Excellency. You know, a very good point. You know, I also welcome, you know, Mr. Adrija Drjanovic. We will come back to you, you know, to introduce you. But before you, let's finish, you know, with the answer to the questions, and I continue with Mr. Brody Sinclair, and I think. It's a good point. You know, the more agreements we have, the more you know, relationship. But also, you know, I think, you know, those agreements, if we're, you know, they're agile agreements, you know, because we need to see, you know, how countries, you know, can be more open, you know, to depends, you know, to step up the game, you know, and this depends how the turn of everything is coming in this global economy. You know, I think that will be another point of view to look, you know, because also, you know, that agreements for a long time, but it needs to be reviewed, needs to be negotiated, and these kind of things, and maybe sometimes taking so long, but sometimes, you know, it's better, you know, to have this kind of agile system, you know, to understand or say, okay, the more we negotiate and the more we lose the momentum, you know. And I think it's another aspect, you know, when the country, they can look on that, you know. But Mr. Brody, you know, the floor is yours, you know, to answer a few minutes.
Sure. I was just going to add, I mean, it is unfortunate, especially over the recent years, that trade and kind of economic connections between countries has kind of been painted as a zero-sum game by some people, and I just don't think that's correct. You know, as you know, Costa Rican ambassador was just pointing out, you know, that there is a virtuous cycle here. If you can, you know, support through trade agreements and making those connections, you know, industries in one country to improve, you know, not even your own country, the other country, the trading partner, to improve, then you know, consumers in that country become wealthier. They lift out of poverty, they move into the middle class, and then they have more disposable income to buy the goods that you are sending to that country. And so it does lift all boats if you can kind of get it right. The trick is to make sure that, you know, that is there's a breadth in that growth, and you're not leaving people behind when you're doing that. So there is definitely a trick to it. But I think we should avoid thinking about it as a zero-sum game, and certainly as a virtuous cycle. The other part of it, which you know, is probably less understood or sort of fits into this as well. I think the zero-sum game idea comes from, you know, one country sending finished products and another country sending the same finished products to each other, and they're kind of competing for the same consumers. But supply chains and modern trade is very complex. Like there's inputs that are going from one country to build a finished product and then being sold to a third market and stuff like that. And if you're not letting that happen, everybody is poorer for it. It's a much more complex picture than what it's being painted. And I think it would be great if that collaboration, those inputs, the innovation that goes into those sorts of things was better understood, and people would see it as much more of a virtuous cycle.
A very good point, especially right now with, the crisis in the supply chain and this, how the goods are moved, and yes, that competition is very, very pointed out, Mr. Brady, about this situations, but yes, let have Dr. Abdullah Nazardin, his comments. After that, we go to Mr. Adrija.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Manuel. What I could add actually here is, I don't know, sometimes one of the issues that are important to look at are the impact you're creating through economic diplomacy, and as you know, sometimes it's very difficult to quantify or to see exactly what the impact is in order to be able to know how you're going to actually improve and do better steps and actually reformulate your own model in order to have a more suitable model. Those are very practical questions that usually we face, and those impacts actually, as Ambassador Fernando have also, through his example, have explained the project they have done in Costa Rica and focusing on some social aspect through economic diplomacy. So it's very difficult to look at those impacts and to see them clearly. But in our work on the daily basis, as long as we keep actually focused on how to make people's life better on both sides of the spectrum, that actually should always make us move forward. When it comes to the recent pandemic, actually, and I will be very I will focus mainly on Lebanon to make this even more practical. Lebanon is a country that actually rely heavily on remittances, and remittances that goes to Lebanon are actually the fuel for our trade with other countries, and this is how actually we import. And I think the pandemic have affected us in that specific way. Economies across the world have actually also had their own problems. We have a much lower amount of remittances coming to the country, and has actually reduced our ability to import, and we face many shortages at many products. So this is why actually those lessons help every single country to know how to diversify, avoid them in the future. And post-COVID, at the moment, the government is mainly focused on trying to sign a kind of, if you want, a new agreement with the IMF in order to put the whole finances of the country back on track, and they try to revise all our trade agreements in order to make sure that the economy can benefit from this. And to be honest with you, those times are, as everyone know, are kind of extremely important episodes of trade in the world, with all the changes happening. Every day you have new things: digital trade, sustainable development. I will give you an example of the GSP system, for example. To have access to the US market custom free, we'll need to have actually more focus on green. Your industries must be more green, more women empowerment, so some quotas in terms of human rights, and that is forcing you to go back to your country and try to actually reformulate the whole way you do things in order to be able to deal with other and trade with other countries. So very challenging times, interesting lessons learned, and thank you for that very interesting forum and those very interesting ideas.
Oh, welcome. Yes, you pointed out, which we'll go to the next question. But before that, I want to point to you pointed very well. The new new normal, how to adapt in those conditions and how we can shift, to be resilient, because that is important. Any country, we face any country face a problem, and they see how it can be resilient and how fast can be that, and what needs to be done, in order, to partner. And I really appreciate here, when you share, especially Her Excellency, from Island, the ambassador from Island, and also from His Excellency from Costa Rica, with working with New Zealand, the same size country, start to work together, and also, to say, okay, how we can work together, and how, we can focus on few things, and how to create that moving forward, especially New Zealand right now having some challenges, to how we, with the data, and how we can do that better, and try to get some lesson learned, partner with Canada, Chile, and and other country. It is beautiful to see this kind of, and I want to, for our audience to understand that, because if they are focused on these kind of things, it's good, also, for civil society to understand, and to understand, when those agreements are done, and what is behind the scenes, what he wants to create, and how they can help and support and be proactive, not just reactive. Oh, we send that agreement. Why we need to send that? It will sign up. I think that is a good, to communicate, in each country, try to communicate better, to understand each person, to understand why we are, what that trade agreement is important, why we partner with that country, why we're working on that path, because after that they understand, and also, they shift the mentality and the way to say, oh, by the way, we can make it happen, and also I can't not use this job anymore, because that will end, in this industry. I need to myself, to move, to a green job, to understand what, electric cars, also AI, or also, how we can shift that, because when you have already prepared, the population, to say, okay, we're going in that direction, and we are not ready, not, let's be accounting, be a lawyer is okay, but what we can help, and for the new generation to understand, especially, because we have lots of students here, to watching, to say what I can do right now and contribute, in the next years, to be vital for that agreement, to help, to create that product, or to create that service, in order, my country to grow, and to be so successful, and also with the partner which are in. But not the last, let me introduce, our guest, here from Mr. Adrija Judovic, Second Secretary Embassy of Montenegro to United States. Since is from 2008, and he was been serving in the Embassy of Montenegro for Second Secretary. His portfolio is, focus on political, economic, and security affairs, especially anti-terrorism and cyber and hybrid threats. Before he was, between 2015, September 2015, October 2018, he was working as Director General for NATO and Security Policy of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Montenegro. Also, he was part of the team which worked in the Montenegro accession to the NATO. Also, he actively took part in preparation for all NATO summits and foreign ministerial during the period of that. Also, what is important here, he was part of the team that organized the historic visit of Vice President Mike Pence to Montenegro and the Adriatic Center Summit in 2017. Also, he was the Director General of the before there, also he worked in security policy, and he completed foreign service traineeship and worked in Director General for multilateral affair. Welcome, Mr. Adrija. It's a pleasure to have you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for having me here. And it's an honor and a pleasure to discuss these important topics with all my fellow speakers and, of course, with you. And also, I know that the other participants will not get offended, but I have to say that it's a special pleasure to share this stage with the Madam Ambassador of Iceland, considering that the Iceland was the first country who actually recognized Montenegro after we regained our independence, and also the first country who ratified our accession protocol to NATO. Having in mind all that, let me give you some brief 5-minute, let's say, overview of activities of us here, and of course of government of Montenegro and our Ministry of Foreign Affairs concerning economic diplomacy, and that the economic diplomacy is one of our top foreign policy priorities. And it's also a part of the official government agenda, which and one of the goals of government of Montenegro, of its program for 2021, is to strengthen the system of economic diplomacy, and that has been done by adopting the framework where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is some sort of clearinghouse or the entry point for all initiatives concerning economic diplomacy. And these initiatives are these days mainly centered on two key aspects. First of which is attraction of foreign investment to Montenegro. And secondly, it's a promotion of Montenegro as a tourist destination, having in mind that tourism is one of our top economic activities. Concerning the direct investment, there are several foreign direct investment. There are several key incentives why the foreign investors should come to Montenegro and invest there. First of all, we have a highly competitive tax policy, and we have one of the lowest corporate tax rates in Europe, which stands at only 9%. I think only Malta has lower than us. Also, the domestic and foreign investors get a lot of incentives at the local level. We use euro as a foreign currency, which is which makes the job for investors much easier, and we have a very attractive trade regime. And also, it's important to emphasize that our membership to NATO is a guarantee for the security of the investment, as well as for the respect, for the respect of the rule of law in Montenegro. As far as it comes to other things that the government has been doing in order to promote trade, to promote investment, to promote better economy, the government has also adopted the so-called program of economic reforms, focusing on three key aspects of economic growth: tourism, energy production, and IT industry. Of which the special attention is paid to the IT, most precisely development of software, development of fintech activities. And also we are proud to say that we are doing a great job in switching to renewables and making our energy consumption sustainable and aligned with climate goals. I can inform you now that around 80% of Montenegro energy needs at this moment are serviced by renewable energy, which we think is a great result. And finally, having in mind all this, Montenegro is also trying to implement and succeeding in it a whole set of economic and financial reforms so that we can make our economy more accessible to foreign investors and, of course, more beneficial to our citizens, as well as that so that we can align it with the standards of the European Union, concerning that we are the candidate to join. So first of all, the reform package is focused on 3 programs. They are called Europe Now, Europe Here, and Montenegro Now. Europe Now program is primarily for the domestic market, and it concerns the citizens of Montenegro and the raising of the minimum wage in Montenegro. Europe Here is administrative and legal program, which focuses on strengthening the administrative capacities, the rule of law. And of course, the Montenegro Now is the program of government investment in the economy and infrastructure. For us, the infrastructure is one of key areas, and it's planned that more than 5 billion euro will be invested into the infrastructure in Montenegro from now to 2025, with more than 1 billion euro invested next year. And all that is going to, we hope, is going to create the conditions for investment in Montenegro better, as well as to strengthen the position of Montenegro as a top global tourist destination. Talking about the questions of this panel, we have to say that, as I said already, the Montenegro considers economic diplomacy to be one of the top tools in our diplomatic arsenal. And that is definitely the case now more than ever, having in mind that we are trying to mitigate and to eliminate the negative impact of the pandemic, which hit us hard, especially our tourism sector. But we are now recovering. We had a great tourist season, and a lot of credit for that goes to our diplomatic network around Europe and around the globe, who promoted Montenegro as a safe tourist destination and made possible the recovery of our tourism industry. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the further discussion.
Welcome. Thank you so much for sharing. Montenegro. It's a great country, and also I work with your colleagues from the embassy, also with His Excellency. In 2019, when I did my first roundtable in Eastern Europe, on another topic, religious freedom, and we invite and it's a pleasure, when to see a country wants to, and you pointed very well, focus on tourists, energy product, and IT. And also I love what you shared about Europe Now, especially to the domestic market, Europe Here, about legal and administration, and Montenegro Now, especially infrastructure, and that is very important, and glad to hear your tourists get back, and again, the communication is very important, what you mentioned, because your team try to attract with to say it's a safe to come to this country, to Montenegro. It's what we can see there, and I think it's beautiful to understand and see how your country putting together all the possibilities using in this economic diplomacy to work with different countries with more experience in this, and not to be also part of European Union, to build that momentum to create this wealth and this stability. Also, Her Excellency and Your Excellencies, I will keep you another for 5 minutes. I know we go so long. I appreciate it because you stay here. I respect your time, and I understand. You have a lot of things to do. I'm so grateful, and also our participants they are very grateful. To have you here. The second questions in the end will be just 1 minute from each of you. To conclude this session, because we can discuss more and more and more, and I love to hear more, and but I want to be respectful with your time. The second question is, can we use economic diplomacy to help build resilience post-pandemic? Your Excellency Bergens, you have the floor, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you to Mr. Juranovic for the kind words to Iceland. We were very happy to be the first, and I can say that it's safe and very beautiful to travel to Montenegro.
Thank you.
Yes.
On the post-pandemic world and how to build resilience, I think the most important aspect is that countries will not revert to protectionism, because I think that will not be of help to any of us, and we need to recreate the conditions for free and fair global trade. But we need to cooperate much more closely when it comes to international health issues such as COVID. I mean, we have to build trust in international organizations such as the World Health Organization, because we need it in when we have global issues such as COVID, and we also need to in order to build back our economies, we need to make the vaccination globally available, and there we have tools like COVAX, because none of us, we will never build back terror in any way if we don't ensure that the vaccines are equitable to all. So.
Yes, no, I totally agree, Your Excellency. Thank you so much, for that, because I think what we learn, is like what we learn from this pandemic, to not come back to the same situation, to be again in lockdown, and how to use those tools, it's a vaccine or other tools was necessary, for the population, to keep moving and and also you said very well, that this protectionism, to not, all the countries to be, for a free trade, to be open, to work together, and I think again to communicate better, because different, from the politics point of view, they change. In different directions, but the point is, how we can be sustainable, how we can be, constant, and with those decisions, and how can also be flexible, to make sure, those hopes, and situations that are not occur. I'm going to, to His Excellency Dr. Fernando Yurka Castro, to say 1 minute, about these questions.
Yes, thank you. The answer is yes. Of course, we can use economic diplomacy to help resilience post-pandemic. We should learn the lessons the pandemic actually brought us, and definitely one of the most important is that epidemiological control is definitely not only a national security affair, it's at the same time a regional and international affair. And this is absolutely very important. We are not going to be able to be completely safe if the rest of the countries of the world are actually safe too. And to do that, we have to be able to provide enough vaccines to all of those countries, and we have to use economic diplomacy to do so. On the same way, the World Health Organization and Costa Rica preview technology pooling initiative to ensure access to COVID-19 health products for all. Our proposal was made seeking to wide access to health technology to the people of poor countries facing COVID-19. The COVID-19 pool has received the support of 37 countries and 2 Nobel Prizes winners the opening day, and a lot of countries has been supporting also since then. Thank you.
Oh, welcome. You pointed very well, on this, because we are in the everyone was in the situation of reacting. What happened right now. We are in what we can do better, and to avoid those situations. And you pointed very well, any initiative, on the good way, to be resilient and to pass easily if the same situation is coming again and to that country or to all, how we can do together to move forward. And Mr. Brandy, you have the floor. Thanks so much.
Well, I totally agree with the other panelists as well. Economic diplomacy can help with resilience, and in fact, it's vital for it. New Zealand's response really is to being more resilient in a post-pandemic world. It's not about concentration of supply chains or onshoring of them. It really is about diversification, especially for small economies like New Zealand. That's the way to be more resilient. And that means improving trade facilitation and removing barriers. And that starts with vaccines and the equipment that is also needed to make sure that we vaccinate the world. And that's something that New Zealand's concentrated on in APEC as host this year as well, to try and get customs in that region to appreciate that and to try and sort of free up the movement of vaccines and essential equipment, critical supplies there through better trade facilitation and removing of tariff and non-tariff barriers. So absolutely it has a role, just a very, very critical role.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate diversity. This is another a great approach. When don't be just with 1-2 products or few, just diversity, and try to agile, and that is it's a good approach and on these days, and and resilient. Wonderful. The next is Dr. Abdallah Nazardi, please.
Yes, thank you. Actually, when you talk about the word resilience, one of the first thing I look at is what does the word itself mean? What do we mean by being resilient? And based on the definition itself, resilience is actually recovering and taking your shape as if you were before any kind of conditions you went through.
Okay. I think we have some problems. I think we, it's the timing, stays too long, and using this kind of live stream sometimes is happening. I'm very grateful and thankful for having you here. Is an honor and a pleasure for the community of U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights. We want to send a message out. We want to our focus is in education, and also to create awareness to everyone, to understand how the country is moving forward in different topics. We are on human rights diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, economic diplomacy. And also, yesterday we have a panel about religious freedom, and we want, to create this kind of awareness to everyone. And we are grateful to be part of this event. I see the participants. My team, production team, told me, that are very excited to understand about your country, that they want to visit your country, they want to work with your country, they want to understand more, and that create for me create I'm very happy because right now I'm in the position to share my knowledge, to give to and support the new generation to make a difference in this world, and understand each culture, understand each country, and also each element which is necessary. Dr. Abdullahi, maybe your connection is okay right now. You can say 1 minute the final things. If you are welcome. If you can hear us, if not, you can hear us, Dr. Abdullah. Sorry. No, I think Your Excellency, and also Your Excellency, thank you so much again. We are concluded this our economic diplomacy panel here. Thank you so much, and I invite you, to our next session, on economic diplomacy club, which we'll have in 2021. Also, good news. I don't know if you hear that, but the Meyer browser, said, starting with Monday, we cannot use mask indoor, which is good. I hope we can meet in person, and looking forward to meet in person with you, and to have again this kind of events and here in Washington D.C. Thank you so much. Looking forward, to see you, and thank you so much again for being here with us, and thank you for the participants, from over the world, and we will give you a report how many are and how many they see it, and thank you again, and wish you the best and on your mission here also in the United States, and we're looking for more good news and to participate to the learning more from your excellency. Thank you so much again. Have a nice day. Thank you so much. And right now, we conclude our economic, our second day in economic diplomacy, and looking forward, to have you next year. And also, I let our founder Isabelle Vladoiu to join me, to conclude this summit. We have a wonderful day 1 and day 2. I hope all the participants over the world and enjoy our distinguished guests. It's an honor, and we respect everyone's time. We want to make sure we take the message out. You learn something, in the human rights and economic diplomacy, and that is wonderful to see that. With more further ado, I want to introduce the founder, Isabelle Vladoiu, to join me, and
Thank you so much, President Oancia. I agree with you. Wow, what an incredible 2 days. We are so grateful for joining us from your homes, engaging with our distinguished guests and panelists. And it reserves me the honor, or unfortunately, to have come right now to the end of our second annual Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit. We've been through 2 amazing days, and I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to be right here virtually streaming to your homes, to your offices, to each corner of the world. So right now, I would just like to start the closing ceremony of the second annual Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit. Over the course of 2 days, we've been blessed by the presence of many government officials and leaders. We heard from Honorable Nadine Menza, the chair of U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, leaders of the IRF Roundtable and the IRF Secretariat, their excellencies, the Ambassador of Slovak Republic, the Ambassador of Iceland, the Ambassador of Costa Rica, and diplomats from Georgia, Greece, Portugal, Lebanon, New Zealand, Pakistan, and many other leaders of NGOs who are doing fantastic works in their countries and around the globe. More than 53,000 pages are reached on our Facebook and thousands others on YouTube for the session for the first day of the summit on yesterday. We had our first breakout session in premiere entirely in Spanish last night, where I got a pleasure to be with our human rights consultant Vicky Levia, who's also the director of RIMLA United States, along with other RIMLA members from across the world in Latin America. We also had a breakout session on children's education, where we were surrounded by our regional directors and from Liberia, from Eastern Europe, which was conducted by President Oancia as well. I want to invite you this conclusion to continue to stay connected with us, with USIDHR and our work. My team and I are so honored to serve you, to bring to you not only this summit and other events, but to inspire you and provide you with new knowledge. As participants of this summit, don't forget that you can take advantage of our summit offers and enroll in any of our popular courses that you heard about throughout the course of the 2 days. The Human Rights Consultant Training, which is now available both in English and Spanish, the Diplomatic Protocol and Etiquette course, Human Trafficking, Business Consultant, and others. As attendees to the summit, you can benefit for continuing to learn with us, from us, because what we are aiming to and what we are doing here at USIDHR is we bring together experts to teach these classes, to teach you. You'll only have, unfortunately, until Sunday to take advantage of these wonderful offers, which are only for summit attendees. But finally, I want you to help us spread the message and spread the message of education to millions of children in need. Therefore, we are a nonprofit organization, a 501c3 nonprofit think tank based here in Washington, D.C., with footprint in many countries. We accept donations that will go towards helping children around the world get a chance to study by providing them with much needed resources to go to school. So for that, I want to invite you to help us out and donate any amount on our website at usidhr.org/donate. As our host, and as your host this year, I want to thank you again, our distinguished panelists, their excellencies, ambassadors, government officials, leaders of nonprofit organizations, for joining this spectacular, won't you agree with me, this spectacular 2 days. And it's not me, but the entire team at USIDHR, Ms. Olivia Flavel, Manuel Oancia, Ms. Ann Oprah, and the hundreds of interns, volunteers, and the team members who have made this year's summit possible. You may not see them because they were in the background working, but thank you. Thank you also for our production team that ensured all the sessions have run smoothly, and especially to our production director, Abel Minaya, without who this summit could not have been streamed as easily across so many different platforms. See you all next year for the 2022 Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit. Don't forget, we also have today a breakout session tonight at 6 p.m. on the subject of women's health rights, which is going to be moderated by our amazing women's rights advocate and reproductive advocacy specialist and senior research associate at USIDHR, Olivia Flavel, and her guest, Blaise Hunter, who's also a human rights consultant. So tune in on this page. Meanwhile, share, give a thumbs up, If you are watching from YouTube, like this page, continue to stay connected with USIDHR, with our network, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We are everywhere. Thank you all, and wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, those of you who are celebrating next week, and much blessing to you all, so that we all celebrate on December 10, International Human Rights Day. So hopefully I'll get to hear from many of you on that day, and stay blessed, stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you so much for a wonderful experience.
We